Friends, what an absolutely mind-blowing first day that was at the No-Code conference yesterday. Heaps of new features were announced by Webflow. There were some amazing speaker events. I did my talk at the No-Code conference, and there were just a whole bunch of additional things that made this event the best virtual event that I have ever been to. And I'm going to talk a bit about it in this video, so without further ado, let's get into it. Hey friends, what's going on? Welcome back to the channel. So, day one of the No-Code conference is in the books, and let me tell you, it was an absolutely mind-blowing experience. I didn't exactly know what to expect going into this event because it is virtual. I think a lot of people were a little bit bummed out about the fact that it had to be shifted to a virtual event rather than being in person. But let me tell you, after having jumped into the actual conference platform, having been in the Gather Town that was organized by the FinSuite team, I must honestly tell you that my expectations have been exceeded tenfold. And besides the experience of the virtual event just being absolutely amazing, Webflow also announced a whole bunch of new features that are going to be launched pretty much immediately that are going to be an absolute game changer for people in the no-code space. So let's just start at the beginning. Before the conference started, Raymar and the team at FinSuite actually organized a Gather Town, which is a virtual platform that you can use to kind of talk to other people. So the way that it works is that you create your own little avatar and then you basically get launched into this virtual world that was set up by the FinSuite team. And then you can basically walk around with your little character, approach people, and then start conversations with people who are currently in that world. Now, I've been in Gather Town before and they're quite fun, but this particular Gather Town for the No-Code conference was really awesome because there are so many people who showed up to it just before the start of the conference. And so it was a perfect opportunity to connect with people that I knew online, and it was just heaps of fun. So one of the things that I took away from that experience was that it really much reminded me of the networking part of the actual No-Code conference 2 years ago. So you would just walk up to people that you had probably seen online and you could just start little conversations with them. So it was a really great opportunity to actually say hello to people and to create that kind of networking atmosphere that I think otherwise is quite difficult when you are doing things virtually, but Gather Town really facilitates that. Then the conference started. So everyone jumped into Hopin, which was the conference platform that they used to host the No-Code conference, and Webflow kicked things off with their keynote. I've seen a few keynotes in my time, and I can tell you right now that that one was probably the most captivating keynote that I've ever experienced. Now, if you've watched any of the Webflow education team's video, you'll know that their production quality is through the roof. But there was something different about this particular keynote that really went even further than they had gone in the past. So they kicked things off with a really funny intro, as you're probably used to from the Webflow education team, but then things pretty much moved over to Vlad, who was starting to talk about some of the upcoming features that were coming to Webflow. So before the conference started, there was a whole bunch of chatter inside of the Gather Town where we were kind of speculating what kind of features Webflow would be announcing at the No-Code conference. Obviously, everyone knew that memberships would be coming to Webflow as it's already in beta and they announced it a few weeks ago. But suddenly they started to announce features that were not really on anyone's radar. So the first feature that they announced were some upgrades to the designer. So they launched 2 new features inside the designer called backdrop filters and blending modes. Now, I'm not a designer, so to be completely honest, at the time it didn't mean much to me, but a friend of mine, Nikolai, who also runs a YouTube channel, reached out to me and basically told me that this is like game-changing stuff. So from that, I'm just going to assume that for a lot of people who are designers, this is going to be a very handy feature. Then the next feature that they announced were some significant improvements to how you can collaborate with other people inside of Webflow. So up until this point, working with others inside of Webflow wasn't always super easy. So just for a little bit of context, up until now, there have been 2 types of accounts that you can have. You can have an individual account where you are just the sole owner of your Webflow account, and then there are team accounts where you basically share it with other people in your team. Now, I have an individual account, and what I have done in the past is that I've just invited people to collaborate with me by giving them my login and password. Now, that is obviously not super ideal for security purposes. Also, I've got a whole bunch of other sites that I might not want other people to have access to. But the only other other option that I had at the time was to create a team account and then invite people into that team. But in order to do that, I would have to transfer my website out from my individual account into my team account, which would change all of the Webflow item IDs and then essentially break all of my workflows inside of Zapier. And so the change that they announced at the No-Code conference will combine individual and team accounts together into something called Workspaces. So in short, there's no more transferring sites between team accounts and individual accounts, and you can just add additional seats to your workspace, which means that you'll be able to just bring people in on a need basis, and that will basically make the entire process of basically working with another freelancer inside of Webflow a lot easier. So I think especially people who run agencies will love this feature, because besides being able to be quite flexible in terms of how you add and remove people from your workspace, they've also made a whole bunch of upgrades to the permissions that you can give to your collaborators on a site level. So if you want someone to come in and collaborate with you just as a designer or just as an editor, then now you'll have a lot more flexibility. And again, I think that that will just make the entire process of collaboration inside of Webflow so much better. Next, they announced some speed improvements to the Webflow CMS. Now, this is a classic under the hood feature, and I feel like sometimes people don't appreciate these under the hood features as much as I do, because they are not super visual. You can't see new buttons inside of the designer, but let me tell you, this was a very, very important upgrade for Webflow. So one of the things that I've run into with the Unicorn Factory and some other sites that I've worked on is that as the CMS has started to grow, as I've started to add new collection items, the designer has slowed down a bit. And obviously it's not the end of the world, but it definitely does discourage you from working in the designer as often as you might want to, only because things take a bit longer, things lag a bit. And even though it's never been a huge issue, it's also kind of made me wary about adding more collection items to the Webflow CMS. But now that they have addressed this issue, they are basically going to give you the flexibility back that you would otherwise get when you are just starting a brand new Webflow project. And that is something that I'm looking forward to a lot, because that is really going to push the boundaries in terms of how far you can actually scale sites inside of Webflow. So to anyone in the Webflow team that worked on this project, it is very much appreciated. You have a big fan here. I am looking forward to seeing how much faster the Webflow designer is as a result of your work. And then they announced memberships. Now, obviously they had announced memberships a few weeks ago when they basically launched their landing page and did a little bit of a tweet storm about it all. But since that first announcement, there haven't been a lot of news about memberships. There were not a lot of people in the community that at least I knew of that had access to the beta that they had announced, but they started to announce a whole bunch of new things at the conference. Now, I'm going to dedicate an entire video to memberships as soon as I've had a play around with the beta, but from what I could see from some of the screenshots that they showed during the conference, it looks very, very promising. So besides, traditional user accounts, you'll also be able to combine it with the e-commerce functionality of Webflow and basically create paid memberships. Now, one of the things that I am pretty excited about is the concept of user groups. So you can have something like freelancers and customers, and within those user groups, you can have separate plans for each one of those user groups, which I personally think is going to be very, very important for something like the Unicorn Factory if I do end up making that shift to Webflow memberships. I think for the first version of the beta, as it gets rolled out, you'll see a lot of people who are going to be creating like gated content on their websites, little e-learning platforms. That's at least the plan that I have for my first membership site inside of Webflow. And I think as more people start to use it, Webflow will start collecting a lot more feedback, and then there'll be a lot more use cases that can be addressed with Webflow memberships. But overall, I feel like what I did see in the demo and in those first few screenshots, I think there's a lot to be excited about. I think for people who want to set up a user account website inside of Webflow, it's going to be an absolute game changer. You won't have to use any other third-party tools in order to make that happen. And again, I think with this announcement, Webflow has made a huge step forward in moving from just being a website building tool, which they are a fantastic one, to being a platform that will allow you to build actual apps. Talking about apps, that brings me to the last feature that they announced at the No-Code conference, which I think a lot of people were not expecting, called Logic. Now, Webflow Logic will basically allow you to set up workflows and automations inside of Webflow natively. So again, this is going to be phenomenal for people who don't want to use tools like Zapier, Integromat, those types of things, and just set up simple workflows inside of Webflow. Now, I actually knew that this feature was probably going to be coming at some point because a few months ago, they hit me up for some UX feedback on what they were designing. I kind of forgot about it a bit, but just seeing what they have come up with since then has been really, really exciting because they've added a whole bunch of new things that were not in those initial designs. So one of the things that I'm really happy about is that you can use webhooks as trigger events, and you can also send data to APIs. And I think that that is going to be really, really important in order to basically open up the Webflow automation software to all the other tools that you might be using on a day-to-day basis. One of my initial worries that I had was that the tool is only designed to be used for Webflow specific use cases. For example, a form submission happens, but thankfully, they have opened it up completely, meaning that if you want to send data from Airtable to Webflow, you can just set up a webhook and do a whole bunch of things like that. Another thing that I really like about Webflow Logic and the first initial screenshots and demos that they showed us is that it is a very visual automation builder, meaning that it doesn't follow a linear system like you'll be familiar with inside of Zapier. It follows more the kind of layout that you'd get in Integromat with different paths and all of those types of things, meaning that you'll be able to set up somewhat complex workflows inside of Webflow. And that pretty much wrapped up all of the product announcements from Webflow. And so they're not all live immediately. They are going to be launching Logic in 2022, early 2022. Webflow memberships is already in beta, and some of the upgrades to the designers have been launched immediately. But as you can see, Webflow has been doing a lot of amazing work behind the scenes, and I am super excited about all of the announcements that they've made. This is honestly going to be a game changer for so many people working inside of Webflow. It's going to push your capabilities forward by quite a bit. It's going to simplify things for people who only want to work with Webflow. Obviously, on my channel, I talk about a whole different bunch of tools that you can glue together, but I can tell from this first initial version of what they've announced that a lot of the things that you'd otherwise need Zapier or MemberStack for, you can actually just do directly inside of Webflow. And again, this is something that I think a lot of people have been looking for, and I'm really stoked that they have made all these announcements. Okay, so that wrapped up the keynote. It was fantastic. I loved it. And then we moved on to the actual speaker events. Now, there was so many amazing speaker events that were happening at the same time, so unfortunately I had to pick, but I'll be able to rewatch recordings of the actual events, so I'll be able to catch up on some of the other ones that I missed, unfortunately. But I went and watched Curtis Cummings talk about building no-code operations. He works as the basically operations software person at OnDeck. Then I went and watched Timothy Rick's presentation. He runs an awesome YouTube channel, so I thought I'd check it out. After that, I went and watched Lacey Kessler's presentation. Again, fantastic. If you signed up to the conference, you can rewatch all of them. And after that, I watched Aaron's no-code talk about how you can use Airtable to repurpose content. Fantastic. Always enjoy Aaron's stuff. And then I also stopped by the speed building challenge, which was mind-blowing. I honestly couldn't even follow along to how fast they were building things. I watched the quarterfinals. It was heaps of fun. And then it was my turn. So my talk was on how to build marketplaces with Webflow, Airtable, and Zapier. So I did a variation of this talk about 2 years ago at the No-Code conference in San Francisco. And if you have been on this channel before, you'll be familiar with the tools that I used to build the Unicorn Factory. One of the things that I was really excited about with this particular talk was that I was actually able to showcase some of the works of some of the people that watch my videos or part of my course actually have done. And it was just a really good vibe. Like, I saw a whole bunch of people in the chat getting amongst and getting excited. There were heaps of people from the Unicorn Factory hyping things up, which I appreciate very, very much. And as soon as that talk was done, I did a bit of Q&A, which I always love doing. There are a whole bunch of good questions. And in case you missed it, I will probably put up a recording about it at some point if Webflow doesn't share it themselves. And also I have a link to a whole bunch of resources that you should check out. I'll leave it in the description down below and in the comments. And it is basically an overview of where you should get started if you're brand new to building marketplaces. I kind of assembled the best of tutorials that you should use or watch in order to get started. And I also showcase a whole bunch of examples of marketplaces that you can build. So there are a whole bunch of goodies that I'll be adding, and so just go and check that out. And then after that, we jumped back into GatherTown, did a little debrief. I had a good chat with Rayma about some of the features. It looks like everyone was super hyped. And yeah, I'm going to be making more videos about some of these new features as they get rolled out. I must say, absolutely amazing job to anyone who was involved in getting this conference up and running. It was the best virtual event that I have ever been a part of, like hands down. It kind of exceeded my expectations by a lot, and I really am looking forward to the second day, which is actually starting now. So I'm gonna wrap it up right here so I can go and watch Trevor Noah's talk, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'd love to hear your feedback about some of the new features in the comments down below. Other than that, thank you so much for sticking around for the entire video, and I'll see you back here for the next one.